Hi, everyone. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with all of you. Thank you so much for this opportunity, Mark and IJS. I'm a rabbi at Harvard Hillel, and Zivug, a Better Together, does both individual spirituality programming and programming for couples around life cycle transitions, especially around the transition to parenthood and the transition to marriage itself. You'll see, I hope, where spirituality of connection with others intersects with what we're going to be looking at today. Just a personal plug, I have a class on the Omer also that's beginning tomorrow night at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard, if anyone wants to hear more about that. Today's practice is called Hit Kalalut, which is the act of unifying or becoming one with. And this is a practice that's brought down from the Arizal, Rabbi Isaac Luria. Isaac Luria lived from 1534 to 1572. He was born in Jerusalem, grew up in Egypt, spent 2 years, precious years teaching in Sfat before he died at 38 years old. And his student, Chaim Vital, spent the rest of his life, he met him as a young man, teaching and spreading his word. So we're going to be reading today as the text is written by Chaim Vital about a teaching that he received from his teacher, Isaac Luria, or as many say, the Arizal. So Hit Kalalut is the experience of becoming one with a group that's larger than yourself. Thanks so much. And it's something that can be done internally, of working with the different parts in us. It can be done with our communities, which is what we're going to be looking at today. And it can also be done with God or with parts of God and each other. I'm going to screen share. Just so you know, take what works from this and leave the rest. This is designed to be an offering, and if you have a Vipassana or other Jewish meditative practice that feels like it's what you'd like to be doing today, take this as an invitation and let it go. But if you're curious, I'll be giving a couple. We'll do a quick teaching. I'll give a couple intentions throughout the sit, which you're welcome to listen to, or again, to stick with what you were doing beforehand. So. Hit Kalalut, can people see? Is based on a teaching by Isaac Luria, and it's based on the text from Leviticus. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against members of your people. Love your fellow as yourself. I am God. And the second half of this is Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha ani Adonai. You should love your neighbor or your fellow as yourself. And there's a lot of commentary. Some think that this is the most important verse in the entire Torah. But we're going to see that the way that the Isaac Luria interprets it is rather subversive and interesting. So Rabbi Isaac Luria also stressed to me, being Chaim Vital, that each of us, chaverim, spiritual practitioners, should, before dawn services, and when you're walking into shacharit, should receive upon themselves the mitzvah of loving their neighbor as their self. And if you've ever heard or seen this in a prayer book, this comes from Isaac Luria. It has become a wider and wider practice, and now can be found in some Orthodox and some conservative prayer books, that you can begin services in the morning with this phrase. But we'll see what he means by this. So he says that they should intend by this that every member of the community of Israel is their own body, as in you're not your own body, but you are a limb of a larger body. So by means of this intention, they will be able to be kilula with the rest of Israel from the state of being, and from that state bring about supernal rectification, tikkun. And in particular, one must love their group of chaverim, the people who they're practicing with. and think of themselves as just one limb of this group's body. Okay, so Isaac Luria is known for being obtuse and difficult, but basically what he's saying is that we should meditate before doing anything else in services, before or any other spiritual practice, on connecting ourselves with all other people and see ourselves not as a singular entity, but rather a part or maybe a limb of a larger whole. And what we're going to be doing is you can practice this inside of ourselves. We're not going to be doing this today, but we can do this with our families or with our kin or with close spiritual community, whichever seems like the most interesting or helpful. We're not going for something that's difficult, but we're going to start by meditating on feeling one with a group that we feel close to. And then we're going to move a step out to feeling one with our friends. And then we're going to move a step out and feel close to our global communities. What does it feel like to be a limb of our local communities? Our global community is the next one. And then moving out to spirit, world, mystery, or one with a God name of your choice. Not necessarily a place to stretch, but here's a thing to do. I was recently at the aquarium and science museum in Boston, and they have a little exhibit where you see yourself as a city, a little light on the city of Boston on the globe. And then the next picture, you can see yourself as the earth or going around the sun. And then you can see yourself as the sun among other suns and stars in the area. And then you can zoom out and you can see our sun in the whole galaxy in just a little piece. And then you can see yourself as our galaxy, the Milky Way, inside of the universe. So similarly, we're going to be zooming out. And just in case anyone noticed, he's talking here explicitly about being part of a Jewish unity. And what I want to invite us all to do today is, if that's useful, you can use that. But I find it much more valuable to focus on unities that are much more wide and inclusive than just Jewish practitioners. But if that feels resonant for you, you can try it too. So I invite you to take your seats or be comfortable in whatever way you most like. And we're going to begin with some silence. I'm going to come in and give us some prompts of focusing on various visualizations. And if you feel inclined to call that to mind and see yourself as a little part of the whole. Noticing our breath, or whatever we like to focus on in meditation. Just to focus ourselves and bring our attention down and inward. Arini mekabel alai mitzvat abore ve'avta l'reacha kamocha reacha kamocha. Invite you to call to mind your group of families or kin or chavarim, your close spiritual community. Or just open your eyes and change Zoom to gallery mode and peek at each other and see yourself as a larger whole. Arini mekabel alai et mitzvat abore ve'avta l'reacha kamocha reacha kamocha. Now you're welcome to either keep your visualization on your kin, being a limb of that, or to zoom out and see yourself as part of your local community. In what way do you function or exist as a limb of your local community, however you want to define that? Arini mekabel alai et mitzvat abore ve'avta l'reacha kamocha, reacha kamocha. You're now welcome to either to stay with your families or chavarim, to stay with your local communities, or you can zoom out and imagine the whole planet. All the sentient beings, all the non-sentient beings, Gaia, or whatever it is that we want to call the whole that is the planet. How do you function as a little limb on the whole? Harini mekabel alayet mitzvat aboreh ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha reacha kamocha. I want to invite you to either stay with whatever you're holding yourself connected to, or to step back into heat kalalut with Ein Sof, with endlessness, with the all, with the mystery, with the unfolding. And this feels different for everyone, and if it slips, you can come back to any of the others that felt really good. But what would it feel like to just feel one of everything? When you're ready, I invite you to open your eyes. And open up the chat where everyone was sharing their wishes and prayers. And from this place of connection, of feeling one with and one of, just scroll through them and let your heart break and open to each other. Because we're all one. Amen to all of our prayers. Amen to our collective prayers. It's a total pleasure and honor to learn with you. I'm going to drop into the chat just a link to opportunities for further learning with me. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Rabbi Getzel Davis. Just beautiful practice today. And our custom is to seal that practice with an opportunity for those in mourning to recite Kaddish, if you're in mourning, or if you are observing a yard site, or if it's your custom to participate in Kaddish. And for those who are not reciting Kaddish, to extend your practice, particularly this Heat Kalalut practice, because in that practice, there really is no separation between those who are in mourning and those who are not reciting Kaddish. We're all in this together. So I invite you to stay present and attentive and connected to those who are. And you are invited, if you're reciting Kaddish, to put the name or names of those you're honoring today in the chat box, either now or after we recite Kaddish, as you like, and to join me by rising in body or in spirit to recite the words of Kaddish together. Yitgadal, V'yitkadosh Shemei Rabbi, Ve'alma Dibra Chilutei V'yamlich Malchutei, V'chayechon V'yomechon U'chayei B'chol Beit Yisrael, Agala Bizman Kariv V'imru Amen. Yehi Shmei Rabba Me'olam Amen V'amen. Yitbarach V'yitabach V'yifar V'yitamam V'yitnaseh V'yitadar V'yitared V'yitalal Shmei L'kedusha V'yifrach Ela Kol Birchata V'shirata V'shmitata V'neshama Amiran Aman V'imru Amen. Yehi Shlama Rabba Min Shemaya Hayim Aleinu V'Yal Yisrael V'Yimru Amen. Oseh Shalom B'Ramav U'Yaseh Shalom Aleinu V'Yal Yisrael V'Yal Kol Yoshvei Tevel V'Yimru Amen.
Amen.
May all those in mourning be comforted by the one who comforts all mourners. We want to thank our teacher for today, Rabbi Getzel Davis, joining us from Harvard Hillel for a beautiful practice, and looking forward to some conversation about the practice, an opportunity to reflect on it together, perhaps to seal the practice for those who are able to stay on. If you're not, if you're leaving us now, we hope you'll join us tomorrow or the rest of this week. Remember, we'll be practicing through Thursday, but no live session on Friday. Tomorrow, please join us to practice with Rabbi Levi Derby, who'll be joining us from the Peninsula Jewish Community Center in the Bay Area. And thanks, as always, to Will Priest, who's been holding our tech space with skill and grace beautifully. And we're very grateful to you, Will, for doing that, and for Firkins Reed for writing Shotgun with Will. If you do have a question, about today's practice, or want to share a reflection, please put it in the chat box. I'll try to keep an eye out for the questions. And Will, if you're able to jointly spotlight Rabbi Davis, and I can't, that's very hard to tell on the phone. People hearing me okay? Sound is okay? Yes? Getzel, can you give me a thumbs up if that's true?
Yep, you're great.
Okay, excellent. All right, so this was really great. And I just want to say that for our Omer practice, with Chesed next week, in IJS and our Tikkun Mido practice, basically we translate Chesed as loving connection, and the basic idea is essentially what you were teaching today, of what I guess Thich Nhat Hanh calls interbeing, this kind of seamless, which basically presents the idea that separation, our sense of ourselves as separate beings, is really an illusion, and the deeper truth is, as you described it, that it's all included in the one. So I wanted to invite you to talk a little bit about that, and that's what this practice is. Our Jewish mindfulness practice, mindfulness meditation, and mindfulness practice in general is a moment by moment reminding ourselves of, actually, I'm not separate. I'm connected. We're always connected. We're always in this. This was a very practical approach that you presented today that I thought was really helpful. I just wanted to see if you wanted to elaborate on that at all.
Sure.
Separateness.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I'm just like aware of all of these great questions coming in the chat. Just to say, the song that I was sharing was in fact the words, "I hereby take upon myself the mitzvah of loving my neighbor as myself." So we were just doing what Isaac Luria said. The question of Hikalut, it's a really fun one. I'll tell you that I love Chesed as being associated with that like flow outward of self and inclusion. In some ways, I think of it a little bit more associated with Yesod or Malchut. So both of those Sfirot kind of gather all that comes below with above, and in the purpose of joining with something else. So Chesed for me is that loving energy of outflow that flows out and out and out and just loves endlessly. And I'm not sure how different that is of being of a love that is constituent of parts, of holding different pieces inside of us. But I'll tell you that in my practice, I'm teasing them apart a little bit in terms of feeling part of a whole as a little distinct from the experience of being loved or loving beyond all bounds. But they're both beautiful. I see Susan asked in the chat about metta practice,
Right.
And in many ways, I would associate metta more with chesed necessarily than feeling one with. Sometimes we have parts of our body or parts of ourselves that are not that don't feel good, and we can love them. But one thing we can do with is love them. Another one is see ourselves as a whole that includes that other. So, for example, another parsing of love your neighbor as yourself, which I think comes from the Kutzker Rebbe, says, love the evil that's within you as yourself. Ve'hafta l'ra shelcha.
Well, that's really advanced practice, right? That's really
it's super hard,
stuff.
but you can do all of this inside of ourselves, and and sometimes what we're doing is loving, and sometimes what we're seeing ourselves is literally just a being that's bigger than who we thought we were before we practiced.
Why don't we break it down a little bit? Like, so just to going back, right? So the verse the teaching is based on is v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, as you said, right? From Leviticus, that's at the heart of the holiness code. And there's always great commentaries on what does it mean to love someone else as yourself. if you think about them as separate or other than yourself, then the question then becomes, can I love them as much as I love myself? What if I don't love myself so much, etc.? But this turns it on its head, basically saying like, love others because they are yourself. And that is like just that's a game changer right there, right? That's a totally different paradigm for it, right?
It
And
is,
then,
and I want to just underline
yeah,
the intention to put this into services, of having this as a liturgic unit that people
right,
say when they come into services is sourced with the same person who had that exact intention, the Arizal.
right. So some people may not. I mean, some people may have seen this. Other people may not have experienced it. I know it's in some Siddurim. I'm not sure which, modern non-Orthodox Siddurim. Of course, it's in a lot of traditional Siddurim prayer books. But some people may have had the experience in services of having the service leader invite people to look around the room, to meet the face of the people they're davening with, and either do it at the beginning of the service or before Baruch Hu, before the beginning of the call to collective prayer. So one of the questions that, of course, comes up every single time is, how can I do that with somebody who is deeply problematic? And obviously, we didn't get there with this particular practice today or meta practice, but it eventually has to do with extending that awareness out to include, and you kind of alluded to it, in that Kotzker teaching about, well, what about when I see evil in the other? Then how do I do it then, right? So maybe you want to say a word about that.
Yeah. I think that there are parts of me that I don't like. And sometimes what I work on is loving it. And that would be the chesed practice.
Mm-hmm.
But even before we can love it, we have to see it. And similarly, before, like when working with other people, we have to, sometimes we don't like them. And that doesn't mean that there's not a whole that we're not both part of. That doesn't mean, like when we work with cancer in people's bodies, God forbid, like
Right.
sometimes the answer is to cut them out. The same verse is used by the rabbinic tradition to derive the mitzvah of rebuke, of actually telling someone that they're wrong. Because if we're them, like actually it is our responsibility to tell other people when they're doing something wrong, because we're all in it together.
Mm-hmm.
But on one hand, if we do something to someone else, it's like if you're hammering and your hammer slips and you hit your thumb, and if this hand were to turn around and punch this hand for having injured it, like it's absurd. And so too, if we hurt each other or wish each other ill on one level, that's what we're doing.
Right. Just to tack on to that, I think it's the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of modern Hasidism, who basically taught this idea, right? If you see something that is, as you said, like raw, that's evil or problematic or disturbing in another, really, you can love that in the sense that it reminds you to look for that in yourself and to work on eradicating it within yourself. So in other words, it becomes a teacher for ourselves. That still begs the question about like, okay, great, but what about, when we're really dealing with, we, how do we still deal with that evil? And I guess the question then becomes how, and you alluded to this just now too, in terms of confrontation, tochacha, how do we do that in a way that is consistent with love? I think often we think, well, confrontation is inherently unloving, but in truth, here's, I'm setting it up for you here. How do we build love into tochacha, into confrontation? Whether it's internationally or, with our annoying coworker.
Yeah. I think I spent 2 years just studying tochacha, just studying rebuke, because it is so hard for me and so valuable. of trying to figure out when it's the right time to tell someone that you think that they're doing something wrong. And it is harder in a world where we have relative ethics and we're a little less sure that we're right and the other person is wrong, or we're dealing with multiple systems of what we value or what we think other people value. But I'd say that in order to love your neighbor as yourself, the Midrash says, you actually have to tell someone when they're wrong, or when they hurt you, because if you don't, you can't love them.
Mm-hmm.
We're actually just estranged. And if what we're trying to be is unified, we have to somehow figure out how to move from, I often talk about back-to-back relationships and face-to-face relationships, both in the Isaac Luria system and in interpersonal relationships. And if we're really, and we don't have to deal with everyone. Sometimes we can just ignore and say, like, that person's not inside of my area of practice right now. And that can be a very wise decision. But if it's with a life partner or with a close family member who are committed to relationship with, then somehow it's, in some ways, we have to skillfully figure out how to turn towards them and in order to be one together.
Right. The teaching that you led us, the practice and the teaching that it was based on today shifts, I don't know, for me, I'll say this, it shifts it into, even just the word confrontation always carries with it the sense of, I am other than the person I am confronting.
Yeah.
But if even very slightly and subtly, we can experience the confrontation of another as meeting an aspect of ourselves that, we just say that every time I think this person is other or different than me, I have to remind myself, this is just an aspect of myself, literally, right? The other thing I thought might be helpful is that there is this reference in the text to think of yourself as a limb, right, of this larger being. And sometimes I think about it as just being a cell in this larger organism, right? I'm just a cell in this organism, I can just be struck by the absurdity of a cell thinking, I got this, this is all about me, right? And that exhibit that you described, the Science Museum and Aquarium, really just says, oh, no.
Yeah, we're all one. There's another image that's brought, I think, quoting this actually by a Hasidic commentary. I think it's the Or HaMeir, which would be a good word. But he describes us like different limbs of the menorah.
Mm.
And we all have lights that are shining. And we think we're separate lights. But if you just go a little bit further down, we see that actually we're all distinct, but all part of a larger whole. And again, the ethics that flows from that, the love that flows from that, the compassion we all have for each other in this chat, and all of people's brokenness and hopes and loves that come from that. Sometimes we can just turn all of that up by focusing on that which contains the all.
Yeah. Thanks for that. There is here, we have 1 minute, but there's a very good question. Just need to acknowledge the question from Brandy about how do we reconcile this unification with people who have harmed us and the need to stay away from them because they represent a danger for us. And maybe it's worth just noting that this, what Rabbi Getzel is presenting can be true, that which does not mean that there isn't also a need for and justification for establishing boundaries to protect ourselves. It's not a prescription for boundarylessness.
No, it's not. And I would never suggest that. Thanks for asking and acknowledging it. I have estrangements in my own family that I'm fairly happy with, but it is. But just as sometimes things can be part of a whole with repelling each other, and that's what things do inside of the whole. That's why I want it to be wholeness and not love.
Right.
Because part of systems part of a good dance partner is that you push against someone. That part of what, it's not always about being, about dveikut and hugging and just oneness and achdut like that. But hitkallalut actually maintains separateness, where we are separate beings that constitute a whole. And that doesn't mean that we don't bump. The Buddha once said that like living in community is like taking a sack full of hard, sharp rocks and shaking them together until they all bump into each other and become a little smoother. And that's a horribly difficult process, and one that you have to choose to join and who you want to get smooth together with. But but even in that image, like we're separate rocks inside of the same sack.
All right, we need to leave it there. I want to thank you so much, Getzel, for the beautiful teaching. It's great to have you, and hopefully I see there's a lot of enthusiasm for having you back to lead us again if you're willing at some point in the future. Hopefully, yes. And I want to wish you Zisen Pesach. Good luck to you, and of course to everybody in preparing for Pesach, for Passover, which begins Friday night. And friends, we hope to see you all tomorrow. Thanks to you again, Will, and many blessings, everyone. Thank you for being here today.